And welcome to this special episode of, well, I nearly said the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I'm a creature of habit, forgive me for that. But no, this is actually the African Liberty Forum, the online, and the thrust of it has been the idea of engaging and exchanging, or engage and exchange. My name is Big Daddy Liberty. Sikle Ngobese is my government name, if you're really interested. And I'm the host of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. That's a show out of South Africa in Johannesburg. And I am better known as the street fighter of classically liberal ideas in this part of the world. But show is not about me. I'm actually joined by a fantastic guest today, Magatte Wade. She'll correct me if I've mispronounced that. Yes, Africa is not one country. It is a whole continent with multiple languages and multiple cultural groupings. So we don't always know how to pronounce each other's names. But without waffling on, let me actually welcome Magatte to the show. Magatte, hello, hello.
Hey, Sifli, it's Magatte, but it's all good.
There we go. There we go. I knew I would be corrected in the first 30 seconds of the show. That's a very good thing.
What's your yours too? So,
Magatte, very good to have you on this special broadcast by the Atlas Network. Let me just quickly shout them out for putting all of this together, guys. Thank you so much. Magatte, I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation here because it spans, I think, it tells the entire story to a large extent of the African experience for the young African individual, living in these post-colonial societies that are shaped by ideas, as I like to call in my show, that, various societies around Africa are engaged in the battle of ideas. And historically, that's always been a battle of big, bulky, big man politics, statism versus what we really want, right? Which is an individual society. Really, I talk a lot about an individual society. Really, we're a family society. And insofar as us being a family society, the individual taking charge, building wealth, building income, building prosperity in a free society. So I'm going to frame this conversation in that regard. And I know we're able to take questions on the show, so we'll make some time at the end for questions, and we'll get some help from the team from Atlas in that regard. But let me kick it off where I think I should kick it off, which is, who is Magatte Wade? And, what is she all about? Like, who am I talking to here?
Well, thank you so much, Sifli. And yes, I want to take this opportunity to thank again Atlas Network, which is one of my homes. I'm the director of the Africa Center for Prosperity and Entrepreneurship of the Atlas Network. So that's one of the hats that I wear. And as such, it's primarily trying to support with the work of all the think tanks we are invested in all over the continent. Other than that, at the root, I'm just a child of Africa. Especially coming from Senegal. And I would say that I'm just someone who's devoted her life to making sure, my life's purpose is basically to make sure that this black skin of ours becomes respected around the world, and that Africans become co-creators, global co-creators in the world in all the things that matter, whether it's technology, being at the cutting edge of technology, business, name it, we need to be at that level, world class. So, and the reason why that happened, why I didn't just wake up and be like, oh my God, this is what I'm going to do. This is my focus. It happened because I think I was born in Senegal, west coast of Africa, then my family moved to Germany, then to France. But the first time I landed in Germany ever, I remember, I was right around 7, and it was just like this one question just popped in my head. How come they have this and we don't? And I think for me, this as a little girl was, they have all of these roads, they have all of these, these bridges, they have these buildings, and life just seems so easy. All the way from the point that, back home in Senegal, when I wanted to take a shower, my grandma, especially in the colder weather, had to, warm up a bucket of water. And then you had to, just the simple act of taking a shower, you have to really prepare it. Warm the water, mix it up with cold water, then you get in, and it's just cumbersome. Here, you just walk into this thing called shower, turn the faucet on, water comes in as hot or cold as you want. I'm like, are you kidding me? So in any ways, that question really, I think, it's one of those children's questions. It's just so natural, and it just never left me. And I went on a lifelong journey of trying to understand why is that? And then the question became, why are some countries like mine poor and others like this country, Germany, rich? And along the way, I've heard all types of stories. Some people said, with a very straight face, they'll tell you, oh, it's the IQ theory. Blacks and browns are just not that smart. They're just not as smart, that's period. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, because if that was true, how come the minute, blacks and browns get to go to a place that is richer, all of a sudden they can, voila, they can make it. It doesn't have to do with that. And then, same thing with, and then I heard some people say, oh, if only they had access to education. I'm like, do you know how many PhDs we have walking the streets of Dakar without a job, living in poverty? So that also, it's nice to be educated, yeah, but obviously it is not the critical factor. So I've heard it all, Sifli. I've heard it all. And eventually, one time I stumbled, as I was building my own business. I was based in the US, and so the business had a sister company in the US and a sister company in Senegal. And it's right around that time, as I was going through my own frustrations and comparing notes between how easy it was for me to set up shop in the US compared to how hard it was to set up shop in Senegal. I just give you an example. Very back in those days, it was in 2004, this story I'm telling you about, when I built my first business. It took roughly around 20 minutes to start, you go online, Secretary of State's, website, and you form your LLC, name you. 20 minutes, faster if you type fast. And then around $20, compare that to a year's worth of somebody's time to register a business, and close to a year's somebody's worth of income to legitimately register a business. And so as I was going through that myself, through experience, I also was stumbling upon research. And there was this thing called, in fact, all of these indexes that were measuring how hard or easy it is to do business around the world. And when you take it all together, it's this thing called economic freedom. And when you look at the Doing Business Index ranking of the World Bank, you look at the Heritage, Foundation, economic freedom indexes, it is right there, black on white, what I was going through. And this very real experience in comparison I was able to make was right there, measured. And it showed on all of these reports, it showed that it is technically harder to do business almost anywhere in Sub-Saharan Africa than it is anywhere in Scandinavia. I was like, whoa. Now I got my answer. This is the reason we lack economic freedom.
And again, I was about to say, you've opened up the Pandora's box, I think, of what was going to frame this conversation, this idea that, it's not a racial thing. It's not a, as you'll often hear, all sorts of vested interest groups try and opine away as to why, for example, Africa is poorer than the rest of the world, and why the developing world remains, continues rather to struggle. And you'll often hear these sort of race-based arguments come out. Unfortunately, in my country, in South Africa, you hear a lot of this too, to a large extent, especially given our racial past. However, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and I want to zoom in a little bit on this one. You clearly, I think anybody who's listened to you right now can hear that there is a very strong entrepreneurial streak behind you, a very strong appreciation for markets in particular. Talk to me about that from an individual level, and we'll bring it to a societal level now. I'll have you draw your experiences, coming from Senegal, and we'll talk the African story in that regard. But I want to talk about this specifically from you as the individual. Your appreciation for entrepreneurship, your appreciation for markets as a tool to liberate yourself out of, relative poverty wherever you may be on the continent. That moment, how did it reach you beyond the research, when you then decided yourself, I'm going to become an entrepreneur and I'm going to use markets to lift myself out of poverty?
Yeah, no, I guess for me, Sifli, what happened is, I was on my own, I was an entrepreneur. And I would like to argue that I think it is, for most of us, it is the default setting to be an entrepreneur. I think humans left to their own devices, we go for entrepreneurship. We go for just, this notion of emergent order, so in my case, what happened, and the reason why I became such a strong advocate of entrepreneurship, so I started out as an entrepreneur, and I just took it for granted that that's what you do. That's what you do. You create something. But eventually, once I started understanding the research behind all of this, and seeing how actually none of this was, just like by chance or by lack of chance, you should say, in our case, I was like, if indeed, because at the end of the day, you're poor because you have no money, at least not enough money to take care of all your basic needs. You don't have money because you don't have a source of income. And the source of income for most of us comes from a job. Where do jobs come from? Come from enterprise. So if you're going to tell me that this thing called poverty is indeed solved by this thing called job creation, which is afforded by an environment called free markets, then at that point, I am sorry, Sifle, but it becomes moral. It becomes a moral urgency to make sure that we do unleash that force. And in our case, as African people, you see, we live in the times of George Floyd. The world is out there manifesting, protesting. And I want to tell all of them, any one of you who's very serious about making sure that George Floyd never happens again, you better make sure that you work towards making Africa prosperous. Because until us, Black people, this skin of ours, when you take us as a group, until our average is better than what it is right now, until we become economic powerhouses, I am afraid no one is going to respect us. Chinese are going to have to run around saying, Chinese lives matter. And don't take me wrong, it doesn't mean that I don't support the concept of Black Lives Matter. The concept of Black Lives Matter, I fully support. Our lives matter. But if you're very serious about Black Lives Matter, you have to be serious about capitalism. That's where I have a problem. You go to the website of Black Lives Matter and you see, we want to overthrow capitalism. It's an anti-capitalist movement. So I agree with what Black Lives Matter means. I am a full supporter of that. But then I'm just like, anti-capitalism? Are you crazy? So, this whole notion of racism, I would like to even argue that racism has to do with the stereotypes that are attached to the Black African continent are the same stereotype that's attached at the end of the day to this Black skin of mine. And the only way that's going to be solved is we have to become economic powerhouses. And then whether you like us or not, that's no longer the problem. But you will have no choice but to respect us. And that's what I'm going for. So at this point, I say, we shut up and we work hard, we build our economies, and then the world will start to pay attention.
I think no one will dispute that. I mean, I think there is a large conversation to be had, not only by Africans here on the continent, but Africans in the diaspora too, in their various guises and with the various identities that they straddle. As Americans, for example, that actually the true route to prosperity, the true route to beginning to defeat a lot of the historically a lot of the historically bad ills of the past is actually prosperity on the first hand, and also secondly, the recognition of the power and the efficacy of the individual, not losing that in group identities in their various nebulous forms, and of course, more importantly, the family, the preservation and of the space of the family as the first socializing institution, isn't it? But let me zoom back to this, because I think even as I mentioned those three areas, the idea of the individual, the family, and really a society which is prosperous, which is liberty-leaning. Unfortunately, the continent of Africa cannot say it has, by and large, wherever you may be on the continent, whether it's former English colonies or Francophone Africa, we cannot actually really say that any parts of Africa have really been a free, or an example rather, of a free society, one where the individual is accorded the freedom to pursue their own interests, and from that create the sort of prosperity that lifts a community and a nation out of poverty. And let me then zoom it in to say, talk to me about the challenges that you've maybe experienced in attempting to trade on the African continent. What's been your experience, both at home, maybe in that particular region? What have you experienced? And because the next follow-up question will be to look at the history maybe that informed where we are right now as a continent. But back to the question, talk to me about the challenges you've experienced as an entrepreneur trying to trade in Africa.
Yeah. So I will, we talked already about some of the costs associated to being a legally registered business, to legally registering your business. And this is where I am starting to also be worried. So the time it takes to register a business, the amount of money it takes to register a business is ridiculous. Then in my particular case, you have all of these ridiculous tariffs as well. When you think that in an ingredient list of 7 ingredients, like the main product we make back home and we retail in the US, 7 main ingredients, out of the 7, only 2 I'm able to find at the standard of quality and quantity that I need in my own country. Everything else I have to import, but that's okay. We live in a global world, and everywhere you go, this is the beauty of trade. We trade with one another. If we had to make everything we need, it is unrealistic and it makes no sense, right? So of course, I do have to import a few things, but out of those 5 things that I have to import, elements, 3 of them have a 45% tariff on it, and the other one, almost 70%. I'm like, are you crazy? So it's just, when you do that, what you're doing specifically, you are rendering me non-competitive, because every time you add 50 cents to my cost of goods because of this tariff that comes out of nowhere, right, I technically have to sell this product $2 more on the other end on the market, to make up my numbers. So if you're taking quality for quality, same quality product for same quality product, and I'm competing with a fellow, brand of mine in the US, there's no way to explain that $2 extra on my side. No way. That's what we call lack of being competitive. So, and it's all due to a tariff. And so, so that's one. Electricity, in my case, the cost of electricity is still expensive, although we're lucky to have one of the cheaper ones in all of Africa. But the access to electricity is a disaster. So when we built our last lab, I had to bring in the electricity, there. And what? You go and you pay for the electricity, at the electricity company. And then normally on paper, 2 weeks later, you have electricity. 2 months later, we're going back and forth. What happened? Oh, well, ma'am, we don't have enough meters. So you go in there. So I go finally and I talk to the head of the agency, and he's like, lady, look over there on the table. There is a stack of paper this high, right? This high. And each one is an application. Each one piece of paper is an application. You have this high, you have hundreds. I'm looking like hundreds of them. And he said, for each one of these, we need, for each application, we need a meter. Now look at the meters we have over there. I look over there, 2 or 3 meters. I'm like, I'm never gonna have electricity and my business, and we have to get going. So I go in, I talk to the guy. Obviously I don't bribe him. I talk to him, and eventually I walk out with my meter. But you see, I knew him, and I know how to sell myself. But not everybody is that way, and not everybody should be that way. It should not be that way. So on and so forth. Employees, labor law markets. Did you know that the Senegalese employee on paper is the most protected employee in the world? I'm not making, it's in the world. Well, what does it correlate to? It means that as an employer, I am technically married to my employee, for good or for bad. Sifle, I don't know who you love in your life, but if you were about to marry the lady of your life, and I tell you, Sifle, be careful. The minute you marry this woman, you can no longer divorce her under any circumstances. Would you marry that woman? I think not. So, you see what I mean? These are all, and it's everywhere you look. Everywhere you look, it's just like, I kid you not, it's like swimming through molasses. So when you ask me, what are the issues you have? These are the issues I have. And then you know what happens then? This Stifle is, if you make my tariff 45% or 70%, if you make it so hard for me to have access to electricity, do you know what happens? Do you know what happens? Then it means that most of us are tempted to pay you bribes. Corruption. So when I see people saying, oh, corruption is a problem, once again, I say, no, corruption is not the problem. Corruption is a result of bad and senseless laws.
That's right. And let me pick up on that, because, one could argue that there has been a small glimmer, and I say small with a capital S, because it has been a very small glimmer of hope in terms of the recently developed Africa Free Trade Cooperation deal, which essentially sought to try, on paper at least, open up the continent to intra-country trade in this part of the world. But And other issues you're raising are endemic to the whole continent. You know, the idea of who have we empowered since independence, since the various countries on this continent have sought independence from their former colonial masters. Who have we empowered? Have we empowered the individual and families and really communities to be able to pursue their own interests, their own separate interests, for them to trade, build wealth, and from that wealth, buy a better quality of life? Or have we empowered the politicians, the statists, the army of bureaucrats who basically, for one reason or the other, will continue to pump out all these laws and rules and regulations that essentially place more power into their hands, don't they? The centralized power, if you will, into their hands, opening the door, if you will, to that very sort of corruption that you talk about. You know, the idea that to get a nut, you know, you need to bribe person X, and then to get the bolt, bribe person X to bribe person Y. You know, it's endemic in the continent, but surely, and I want to whittle it down to a question here. And I don't know how strong you are in your history, but I want you to talk to me about, and again, if you aren't strong, it's quite fine. We'll have the conversation. I'll bring in my own examples, if you will. But let's look at the history of your part of Africa. Did post-independence Senegal move, in your opinion, towards being a more free market society, or did it fall for what was, I think, the trap in most other post-independence African states, which is this weird nebulous concept of African socialism, basically a statism develop? How would you describe Senegal? And I'll share my experience in Southern Africa.
Yeah, so this is I'm very glad that you're bringing up the historical part, Sifli, because you know, when I discovered everything I discovered, when I discovered the reason why countries like mine were poor, and along it most of Africa, while others were wealthy, and it had to do with this notion called economic freedom, which touches into the free markets and, you know, property rights, you know, clear and transferable property rights, the rule of law, you know, which I call technically the toolkit of the entrepreneur, right? So as soon as I discovered that, and as soon as I became intellectually, you know, articulate about that, I started looking into our history. And at that time, when I started looking into our history, what I mean by that is, who were we before the white man ever set foot on our continent, right? So who were we? And when I started that work, it was fascinating for me to find that there was very little body of work. But thankfully, we had people like George Ayite, who have spent a lot of time on who we were. Today, I'm very happy that we have people like, you know, the newer generation, Ibrahim Anoba of Nigeria. We have Germinal, you know, Dan over from Cameroon, I think he is from. And, you know, people are digging in deeper and deeper and deeper. And I would also suggest to people to read the work of Kenyatta, you know, especially facing Mount Kenya, where, and he's fascinating because he's one of the only anthropologists, at least from our continent, that I know of, who actually writes about his culture and his people. And so when I started to look there, you have no idea how excited and happy and jumping for joy I was to see that traditionally, originally, us Africans were free marketeers. We were practicing free enterprise. Us Africans, before the white man ever set foot in our continent, we had very thriving society, whether it was in you know, Timbuktu, or it, you know, like that part of the world, my part of the world, you know, very sophisticated trade partners and trading patterns. We had center of knowledge. Timbuktu was a center of knowledge with these books that go way back. Then you go down south to what we call Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe, we're finding you know, communities back in the 11th all the way to the 15th century. You know, when they think, oh, we were just living in huts. No, we had these buildings made of stone, you know, having round, you know, forms. When you look at these buildings, you can't deny the engineering, you know, knowledge and the craftsmanship. It was so amazing that when the white people showed up from, you know, they're just like, there's no way a black man did this. No way. This is too sophisticated. But this is who we were, people. This is who we were. We were on the right track. And then, of course, slavery happened. We won't go into that. And then after that, colonialism, we won't go into that. And then the end of colonialism. And then what happened there? The end of colonialism, unfortunately for all of us, was also happening at a time where a raging battle of ideas, of ideology between two ideologies, one on one end based on, statism ideas, socialism, communism, those ideas were battling with, on the other end, free market and freedom-based, ideology,
Right.
in this case, capitalism. But somehow along the line, we, the Marxists showed up at that point. They were the ones fighting on the other side, and the Marxists happened to be, oh, well, we also hate colonialism. So somewhere there's this, colonialism became embedded with this notion of capitalism. So we Africans are saying, we hate capitalism, we hate colonialism, and rightfully so. And so we're going to partner with the people who hate the same, who actually, disagree with colonialism as well. Happened to be the Marxists back then. So we partnered with them. We took side. We took side based on our immediate experience, but we did not think back to who our ancestors were. So with all the love and respect that I can have for people like Nyerere, for people like Kwame Nkrumah, for people like Nelson Mandela, I believe that today, as Africans, we have to revisit their legacy. It is completely fine for us to say, I understand where you came from. Maybe I would not have done better myself if I came right at that time because of probably the pain, the raw pain. But we really made a mistake. We took the wrong fork at the road. And that's how and when most of us Africans embarked on the wrong journey. We followed social and various forms of statism. And of course, we know what happens when you do that. You go nowhere. So 60 years later, we have nothing to show for. Except that today, the added complication to all of this is, because if we have been left to just our misery, misery forces change. But the problem is, along the path, we were not left to just suffer so we could be reborn. The problem is you had foreign aid show up saying, oh, these people are so poor, let's give them foreign aid. And then the foreign aid started to create all sorts of chaos. So now you have, our leaders who are just not incentivized to change their ways. So when you talk about the history, Sifli, this is where it came from. And I would encourage everyone to start looking into this. Everybody who believes in these classical liberal ideas, let's try to also make it that these are our ideas as well. These are the ideas of our ancestors. Our ancestors were on the right path. And so, and also we're gonna have to make it very clear now. I think a type of revolutionary idea has to start happening on the continent, especially among the Pan-Africans who happen oftentimes to be Marxist. They're continuing the ideology of Nkrumah, Nyerere, and such. They need to know now that actually socialism is colonialism. This idea of statism was brought to us by the colonialists. This is a colonialist heritage.
That's the great irony, isn't it? You'll have, and I don't know about your part of the world, but here in South Africa, you have these individuals who've appropriated the language of the left, broadly speaking, including the new left, the sort of culturally Marxist-leaning left that now appropriates other issues other than class, right? As to being a symbol of either being oppressed or an oppressor. So they've moved beyond class analysis, which is what Marx originally foresaw as to being the divide in society. And now they use race and gender and all these other things. But the point I was going to make is, you now have these individuals arguing that, oh no, their ideology is somehow pro-African or is inherently African, yet they miss the irony that Marx himself, there's nothing black about Marxist, there's nothing African about Marxist. Homo is as European as the next person that comes. But the point is, it's the quality of the ideas and the nature of the ideas that we need to be interrogating. And I think you make some important points here, because we see the same thing in South Africa. To a large extent, the forces of initially the colonial government, and then after 1948, the apartheid government pushed liberation fighters into the hands of the Soviets. The Soviets, of course, who then indoctrinated them with the Marxist ideas. And we are now paying the price of that, unfortunately, not only as South Africans, but our neighbors, my neighbors to the north, the Zimbabweans, the Mozambique. I can go down the line insofar as the African countries that unfortunately, the intellectual minds that governed them were red in tooth and claw, and not necessarily Adam Smith or any of those sort of thinkers. But let me bring it back here, because I must I'm just keeping an eye on time, and I know we only have about 15 minutes left, and I do want to go into the questions if that's what we sort of said we'll do. But before that, I want us to dig a little deeper into this one, because it has implications, therefore, for the young generation of Africans. I think technology and our ability to learn outside of what were, ordinarily the only sources of information historically, which is usually governments, our ability to now actually learn and pick up information and have information at our fingertips, quite literally. I mean, someone might be watching this very conversation now on their smart device in their hand, has really changed, I think, the outlook for a lot of Africans, has really opened up the idea that actually markets and opportunities outside of the realm of the state and the big man politics is actually possible. You can build a property owning, prosperous and free society that actually even doesn't pay heed or credence to the politicians to a large extent. As I maybe zoom us into this direction, excuse the pun, we're on Zoom, let me use South Africa as an example. To a large extent, our politicians and our politics here, even being one of the richest countries on the continent, are ever increasingly sort of being ignored in favor of young people just forging their own way and building their own assets. And I feel like that's the story of Africa, isn't it? It's that young people basically say, why listen to the politicians? Why pay heed to what they're doing when we can be doing something at a local level, at an individual level, to build income, from that income build savings, and using those savings to buy a better quality of life. What has your experience been? Something similar to that?
Yeah, my experience has been something very similar to that. I mean, thank God, and I have to give it to the young people all over the continent. I mean, without the young people, I don't know what we're going to do. We would do, and I would add the women as well. I mean, no offense, Sifli, but you're doing the good work. You're out there, promoting for more freedom for all of us. But no, but Sifli, one thing that I feel like the tech sector is doing quite well. They're going to continue doing the work that they're doing, and I think it's great, and it's opened the eyes to so many to the possibilities of what markets can accomplish. That's great, but we should not, and that's the reason why I insist on this, we should never believe, I think someone said it before, we should never believe that we're going to be able to tech our way out of this situation, because the economy, all the economy is not just not based on tech. My business has nothing to do with tech. At the end of the day, we are still, and as long as some of us have to live in these countries, we are technically hostage of a set of bad policies and bad laws. So I don't care how much money you can even make tech-wise. Look, let's say you live in Nigeria, you make all of this money. Well, it is insane the percentage of your money that you earn, but then goes to pay for electricity. Nigeria having one of the highest, electricity costs, on the continent. And everything is like that. You're paying so much more for crappier, quality of life. And the only way we're going to solve all of this is we have to truly liberate our economies. So, and I would like for people not to give up by thinking, oh my God, well, what she's talking about, these reforms, only the government can do it, but they're not motivated. I am with you guys. Unfortunately, a lot of our governments are not motivated, and that's a whole nother, can of worms. But forget about that. Forget about waiting for their goodwill. If we forget about their goodwill, and short of a revolution, which I never favor, because revolutions don't breed good stuff. I don't believe in revolution. I believe in calculated and strategic moves. So what we have left is, I reckon, everybody on this room, please do not take it for granted what some of us around this room might know, because we are a self-selected group of people who have spent time on these issues. Do you know that probably an overwhelming majority of people in Africa know nothing about any of this? When I have most of the Pan-Africans saying, oh, us Africans are Ubuntu, meaning like we're traditionally socialist. I'm like, again, go back and read the work of Kenyatta. Kenyatta showed how the white people who came in confused our ways of living with our, economic systems. Kenyatta reported very precisely how every piece of land in Kenya has an owner. So this idea of property rights is very real, but the white people showed up and they saw us because we kind of share our land and it looks very communal. It looks communal because that's what we do, Africans. We kind of share, but it is free choice. But no, every piece of land, owner.
I agree.
So
Sorry, I was just going to say, maybe as we look to sort of conclude the conversation, sort of final 9 minutes or so of it, there's two areas that I wanted to sort of leave the audience with. You know, on my show, I talk a lot about, you know, us South Africans, Africans in general, being in a battle of ideas, you know, and what do I mean by a battle of ideas? You know, the battle of ideas theory is that it is a society at the point of a crisis or at the cusp of a crisis. It is those societies where it is he who injects the greatest volume of ideas into a society like that who will sway that society either one way or the other. And historically, in our context, you know, it is those of us who inject the greatest volume of ideas into our societies who can either sway us in the direction of being a more free, prosperous, property-owning, and liberty-leaning society, or we continue basically trudging along the same lines, you know, of these big man politics, these statist, collectivist, socialist type societies, you know. And again, I hate to say this because I did say I want us to end on a positive note, but I hate to say this because
we will on a positive note. We will end on a positive note. Go ahead.
The quality of life of the average African has been unfortunately tainted by these terrible ideas. So we're in this battle of ideas. Now, with that being said, you know, there's people listening to this and they're wondering, okay, so how do we do it? How do we begin to push back against the creeping hand of the state? How do we begin to push back against the big man politics? What does that even look like? I am of the view, and this is why I'm having this conversation with you, that entrepreneurship is a powerful first step with that. Because if we can build a society which is prosperous and wealthy, where people are able to generate income away from dependency on the state, it's the first step in freeing people, isn't it? But the other is to advocate for these ideas, these liberty-leaning ideas. How would you characterize your contribution in you know, the pockets of the world where you operate to spreading liberty ideas? And I'll share mine after you've given your input.
Yeah, so I would like actually to, I was just getting ready for this. Hold on just a second. Because if I don't read this one, I'm afraid I'm going to be in here forever. But I think it's faster that I just read it for you because it's basically, hold on just a sec. All right, so here I found it. Sorry, I'm just.
That's all right. While she's doing that, maybe let me just quickly plug my show. Remember, you can find the Big Daddy Liberty Show on YouTube if you just search Big Daddy Liberty. All right, Magatte, you were saying?
Yes, I got it. So, guys, I want everybody in this room to know that I think the vision, and I call it vision because it is no longer a dream because I know it is possible. And also there is a plan, that's what I call a vision. That's the same thing that Sifli here shares. That's why he's given up on all of his belongings. Sifli, I was so impressed by that. And you making it your life purpose to take this gospel around. So everybody around this room has to see what I have in my head. The beautiful image I have in my head that makes me wake up every day and work so hard on this. In my head, I live in a world where all over the continent, African people are living their most fabulous lives. And what do I mean by that is that I live in a world where Dakar has become the center of culture and fashion. And then you move down to Nigeria, somewhere maybe in Igbo land, where we the center of technology, cutting edge technology, Silicon Valley has moved to Nigeria. And then we go down, you know, all over the continent, and Timbuktu becomes one of the greatest centers of knowledge around the world, and where Africans are showing the world what it is to live a good, prosperous, meaningful life, you know, where we take care of each other, right? So this is the world I live in. And to me, I can touch it. I can touch that world and I can taste it. Why can I? Because we've got everything for it. We've got the human capital. We are one of the youngest, you know, peoples on earth. Our continent has some of the youngest population in the world. And youth is power. Youth is strength when it's properly directed. We have really at their heart, some of the most creative, entrepreneurial people at rock, right? It's there. We have everything under the soil. our African soils are so rich and, you know, everything grows. We have this diversity of people and languages and cultures, which is richness as well. We've got everything except for one thing. And the one thing we don't have, so easy to get. It's economic freedom. It's this liberation around economic freedom. And guess what? What's standing between us and having that is just us in this room knowing about that, number one, promoting it. If enough of the young people know this, what's standing in the way, if they know which chain to break, which we talked about today, and if the women also know which chain to break, let them become the force for our leaders to reckon with. At some point, they will have no choice but to make it. We're gonna make these election slogans, make us the greatest reformers on the Doing Business Index ranking, because that will correlate to my ability to build wealth or not. So my 7 points with that's gonna take us to this world that I have in my head and I live in, call me crazy. Number one, we're gonna have to create a widespread recognition that statism is colonialism, and indigenous Africans created empires for commerce, and we will again. Number two, create a popular movement to leapfrog into leadership position in the 21st century based on thriving commercial societies. Number three, promote improved business environments and greater economic freedom as concrete targets. Instead of being at the bottom of the Doing Business and economic freedom rankings, of our nation should be at the top. Mauritius right now is number 13, Rwanda 38 on the Doing Business. 4, promote e-government and transparency to reduce opportunities for corruption. Number 5, promote special economic zones, startup cities, and charter cities as zones with much greater economic freedom and higher quality of rule of law, so we don't wait for the time that piecemeal legislation takes. Number 6, promote a popular campaign. This is where I'm waiting for everybody. Promote a popular campaign such as africastupidlaws.com. We have to denounce these stupid laws that are standing in the way of wealth creators on the continent. Number 7, promote the Cheetah Alliance. Cheetah in honor of George Ayite, who pinged that word. Promote the Cheetah Alliance. Everywhere people need to be purchasing African products, investing in African entrepreneurs, supporting an ecosystem of African business as a global popular movement. If people around this room focus on relearning their history, meaning prior to slavery, and we become very focused and monomaniacal about this request of ours to be freed from that chain of lack of economic freedom, guys, in this lifetime, everybody in this chat room will see the fruit. We'll see what a prosperous Africa can be. And despite my crazy Wakanda view that I have in my head of a beautiful, prosperous, countries, I think we're gonna be blown away. I think even I will be blown away by what we're gonna see. See guys, this is a promise I have. So there is nothing dark here. All I see all around is potential, and potential we can act upon. We have no time to waste, no time to waste. So let us make sure that everybody knows this. See, don't take awareness for granted. Our biggest problem right now is a lack of awareness. When I have a woman in Senegal who tells me, Magatte, why do you want me to care about the Doing Business? That's for multinationals, that's for politicians. Why do I care? And I want to say, lady, you should care, because you died, your child that I know you're still crying, who just died at sea, trying to make it to Europe to get a job so he can help you, he can help feed you. Your child died because he couldn't get a job in this country. And he couldn't get a job in this country because the doing business environment is terrible. So yes, ma'am, you should care about this. And then she's just like, I have no idea. Well, if we can make sure he has an idea and that other young people have an idea as to why they're looking at stuff and they're seeing the world of Kim Kardashian having all this stuff, and they understand that the only difference is she got to be born in a nation that allows her to build prosperity and they don't, everything will change. And people will take measures and people will come up with ideas to make the changes that you, Sifle, and I did not even think about. So for me, this is the hope. And this is what I see. And we should not let it go because it's possible. I promise you, if we do this, 15 to 20 years from now, at least I know that Senegal will probably be richer than France, the colonial power. Singapore
Absolutely.
did it, Hong Kong did it, we can do it. We just need to know.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Magatte Wade, entrepreneur extraordinaire, I'd like to say. And yeah, like I'm super thankful to the Atlas Network for having given us the time. We are a little bit over time, that's fine. Again, shout out to everybody who's been...
Sorry, Sigrid, I want to give a plug real quick,
Yeah.
because this work is at the heart of the Atlas Network. That's why I'm involved with them. So anybody around this room who actually would like to really dive deeper into these ideas, and you would like to create a free market oriented type of think tank where you're going to dive into these ideas and remove as many barriers as possible, this is the place. These are the people to reach out. Atlas Network.
Absolutely, absolutely. And guys, make sure that we actually get in touch with each other. You can get in touch with me by following me on any of my social media. Just look at Big Daddy Liberty on Twitter, Big Daddy Liberty on Facebook, and of course, Big Daddy Liberty on the YouTube channel. As Magatte mentioned, I will be taking to the road. I'll be living on the road for the next 6 months, maybe even longer, as I advocate for a lot of these ideas, maybe some of the ideas you heard here from Magatte. So you can look forward to that. And yes, if you invite me to your part of the world, including other parts of Africa, I will come. Guys, thank you so much for your time. Magatte, thank you to you